Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the White House today. We're so honored and privileged to have you here. My name is Kelly Sadler. I am the Director of Sarah Getson Coalition Outreach here at the White House for the Office of Communications. And we are just so grateful to have you here. If you look around the room, there's a bunch of millennials, a bunch of students, college activists. We are, as an administration, very eager to support you in your efforts. We're going to have a break. I encourage you to commingle with one another. We've got such a diverse group of people here that are supporting issues on college campuses. There are activists there that stand up for freedom of speech, that are have great stories to tell in terms of apprenticeships and workforce. And of course, these are issues that we as an administration have been working on. Our first panel is going to focus on jobs, workplace growth, workforce issues, apprenticeship issues. We'll then go to a break. There'll then be a Q&A with the president by Charlie. And then we'll focus the last issues on crises on college campuses, which will tackle the opioids crisis, as well as the freedom of speech issues that I know a lot of you have been facing in this room. So with that, I would like to introduce Senior Advisor to the President, Ivanka Trump, and Secretary of Labor, Secretary Acosta. Sorry, guys. Hi, everyone. So we just want to have this be as informal as we can, a conversation with everybody in this room. I just want to mention that this week, Ivanka was in Iowa promoting workforce and workplace issues. She was, if you saw some of the memes, she was out there vaping. We also, the Secretary was also in Ohio this week, basically announcing a 50% expansion in apprenticeship financing, which is a big deal. So we kind of want to just get into the Q&A aspect of this. I know a lot of you submitted questions online, and we'd like to start with Julia Nelson from Long Island, Kansas.
Nice to meet you guys. My husband and I are the 6th generation in our family-owned diversified agricultural operation located in north central Kansas. On the ag side, we raise cattle and hogs, have a row crop farming operation, grain merchandising facility, trucking company, and feed mill. And roughly these entities employ about 100 employees in our rural community. We also operate in the banking sector. We own 5 branches located in south central Nebraska and north central Kansas, and those branches employ about 85 individuals. With the new tax reform structure, we realized we were presented with a unique opportunity to invest in our most important asset, our employees. We felt that this was the perfect time to promote loyalty and ensure our companies have a competitive wage advantage from our top leadership to our entry-level employees. We issued $500 bonuses to all full-time employees, $250 bonuses to all of our part-time employees, and on the ag side, we also raised everyone's wage by $1 per hour. Between the $1 an hour raise that we issued and also the payroll tax reduction, our ag employees are taking home an additional $200 on average per paycheck, which is almost an additional $5,000 per year. And in our rural communities, that makes a huge impact. And I guess, I just wanted to say our family is very appreciative of the work that the Trump administration has done on tax reform and, the opportunity it's given us to reinvest in our employees. My question to you would be, what elements of the tax plan do you believe will improve the job market for younger Americans?
Well,
first of all, thank you. And thank you for your comments, and thank you for your support of tax reform. And most importantly, thank you for your commitment to growing your business here in America, and investing in your workforce. We're seeing this for every large employer who is rolling out wage increases or or bonuses, and associating it with the changes made in tax reform. Hundreds of small businesses across the country are doing the exact same thing. So it has been incredibly gratifying to see in the earliest days of its implementation and having such a positive effect. So to your question about how tax reform is going to help younger Americans, I think multifold. People will be graduating into an economy where there are jobs and where employers are competing for talent. Wages are increasing for the first time after having been stagnant for several decades. So you're seeing wage growth, you're seeing competition for great and motivated and driven talent. You're seeing tremendous opportunity for students to go right into the workforce through training programs and apprenticeship where they have the opportunity to become employed debt-free, and taking an alternative path to a traditional four-year college because of the opportunities that are available in the market and because of this administration's focus on skill development and training. And then I think you see the opportunity expanding for young people to be entrepreneurs and to really harness the innovative spirit that America is so known for and create their businesses and become job creators through a combination of both tax reform, which is decreasing barriers to entry and creating incentive for people to take the leap, take the risk, and start an enterprise, but also through deregulation. The administration has aggressively been deregulating. We're keeping smart, practical, needed regulation in place. There is place for regulation, but we have been so overregulated. And even well-intended regulations often were poorly executed and had real consequence with a disproportionately adverse effect for our small business owners that can't afford the teams of lawyers and accountants to figure out how to navigate and manage them. So I think the combination of a booming economy with tremendous job opportunity and job openings, the investment we're making in skills training and workforce development to assure that the skills being taught in our classrooms, whether it's K through 12, post-secondary, or mid to late career worker retraining, align with the jobs that are in demand in the economy. Tax reform and deregulation is creating a climate that empowers all Americans, and certainly Americans in the first stages of their careers.
Thank you. And let me add a few words to that. First, thank you for investing in the American people. And thank you for having so many small businesses. I started to lose track. You said we do this and this and that. But you know, across the nation, more than 4 million Americans have already received a tax bonus. And that is real money to real people. And that matters a lot to them, but that also matters to the communities, because you mentioned you know, a few hundred workers and you know, about 5,000 more. Well, 5,000 times a few hundred turns into $500,000 or more for that community. So that means that more individuals are going to get jobs in that community as restaurants thrive and other small businesses thrive. And so this has a multiplier effect throughout our economy that is powerful. Let me also talk a little bit about the tax plan, which was your question, because an area of this, of President Trump's tax reform that really excites me is the focus on small businesses. And so historically, small businesses have lost out. Somehow, large corporations might get their needs addressed, but small businesses can be forgotten. And small businesses are the engine of America, especially with new technologies. If you look at between eBay and Etsy and so many other places, there are now 20 million individuals that are accessing global marketplaces with very small businesses because of technology. And they are creating growth, and they are the ones that are hiring so many Americans. And so the president was adamant that this tax plan focus on the needs of small business. And the result is reinvesting in workers, like you did, reinvesting in that small business. And for every effort to grow that small business, then you're going to have even more and more individuals working. And so this is so important. Just yesterday, I read that the Federal Reserve decreased their estimate of unemployment again for the second time this year. So we're already at a 17-year low, 4.1% nationally. And the Federal Reserve was predicting it would fall below 4% this year. And now they're predicting 3.8% this year, and an even greater increase next year. Think about that. We haven't seen those figures in decades. And that's because of President Trump's pro-growth policies like this tax reform plan. So thank you for your question.
All right. Next, we're going to go to Ebonique Ellis.
Hi.
Hey, Ebonique. Use your microphone.
Hi, I'm Ebonique. I have a small business, and I'm a new entrepreneur. And so when I heard about the opportunity funds in the new GOP tax bill, I loved it, and I wanted to learn more about as this program is getting unraveled.
This is one of the elements, and there's so many elements of tax reform that we're all excited about. And just to dovetail quickly, I mean, 100% capital expensing for the first 5 years. That's major for small businesses who have to make large capital investments to get up and running, and it's going to be incredible for the next generation of entrepreneurs. But these opportunity funds and the opportunity zones, is anyone here from South Carolina? The great state. Oh, hi, Harlan. So Senator Scott was a great champion for opportunity zones. It was bipartisan legislation that was included into the tax reform bill, and it basically enables reinvestment in communities that have traditionally been underserviced. And how it does that is by allowing the states and the governors to designate 20% of the areas within their communities as these opportunity zones, and then capital that's invested in those areas, if it's reinvested in those areas, you can avoid the capital gains tax, so you can defer the capital gains. And what they're trying to do, and what we're trying to do with this legislation, and I think it will be enormously beneficial, is ensure that businesses that are creating wealth and creating growth in these communities stay in these communities and don't leave. And there is a flight towards, for startups, for venture businesses. There is a strong pull to leave certain distressed markets in favor of locations that have more opportunities to access capital and networks and mentors. So there's a tremendous pull outside, out of rural America and out of our inner cities to places like Silicon Valley or New York City or Boston. Actually, a full 3/4 of all venture capital funding go to those 3 states. Go to California, go to New York, and go to Massachusetts. 3/4 of all venture capital funding. So we're trying to create a cycle where people invest in communities and keep that investment in those communities. And we think the opportunity zones will create great opportunity for entrepreneurs and for investors to invest in areas previously overlooked. Thanks.
All right. We're going to go to Akesh. Go ahead.
Thank you. Akash Chogley from Americans for Prosperity. My question is about the regulatory state. So this administration and Congress deserve a ton of credit for doing a really excellent job rolling back the regulatory avalanche of its predecessors. But unfortunately, as we know, not every administration is as aligned as this one is on reducing that problem. So are there any plans to work with Congress to actually change the regulatory process itself so that future administrations can't impose so many regulations with such ease and lack of accountability?
Let me answer that, because I think this is such an important issue. And let me talk a little bit about how we look at regulation as a backdrop. And so within this building is the Office of Management and Budget. And one of their jobs is to review regulations and to do a cost-benefit analysis on regulations. One of the concerns that I have is, as a society, we've started focusing so much on cost-benefit and the accounting that even before we get to how we roll them back, we need to ask fundamental principles. What about freedom? A regulation, even if it doesn't impose a cost, a financial cost on society, can impose a cost by restricting freedom. And so we need to start with the presumption that we should be free unless there is a good reason not to be. And ask, is this regulation restricting our freedom? And then we can do a cost-benefit analysis and say, what is the cost to the economy? And these are all very important. One of the related issues that we also need to focus about is rule of law. And here's why. If you look at what happened in the past administration, any number of regulations were enacted. And we're now seeing courts across the country say, overturned, overturned, overturned. I could list half a dozen that have now been overturned. But they have been in place now for 3, 4, 5 years. And so the difficulty is, if it takes 4 or 5 years to overturn a regulation that was enacted without statutory authority, we've got an issue. And this is really fundamental because the regulations get signed into law, in essence, right? Because no one's going to violate a regulation, so they almost carry the power of law. And by the time they get challenged in court, and by the time courts say, you did not have the authority from Congress to do this, it's almost too late. And so one of the interesting ideas, I think, would be to see if there is some way to have expedited review of regulations so that we can say early on, no, we did not have the power to do this. You cannot limit society's freedom in this way.
Naomi Rayo from OIRA, which is in charge of the deregulatory agenda for the administration and regulation in general, she set a goal of pulling back, and the president had challenged OMB and OIRA to, for every new regulation enacted, 2 would be repealed. We ended the year with, for every new regulation enacted, 22 were pulled back, which is amazing. And really, we're just getting started because there is a process. Just as there's a process to put a regulation into place, there's a process to pull that regulation back. But she is incredibly focused on this. All of our cabinet secretaries are incredibly focused and are constantly being challenged by the president. What regulations are affecting the American people that you hear about in your travels across the country? Compile them. Come up with a list. We won't agree with all of them, but a lot of them are really well informed by just the people on the ground, the everyday Americans, the everyday business owners who are feeling the consequence. So in almost every cabinet meeting, the president asks this question. He asked it of Secretary Perdue a couple of weeks ago. What regulations are affecting our farmers? How close are you to getting to a place where you're satisfied that we have the right regulations and we've repealed the wrong ones? So it is an enormous priority for the administration and will continue to be. I actually brought Naomi with me when I went to India for the Global Entrepreneurship Summit put on by the State Department, because I feel that regulation is so critical to entrepreneurship. They are so linked. And having her voice talking about the effects of prudent regulation and also deregulating was a critical voice to that discussion.
You know, my father was a small business owner, and he said he sold the business, and he's not in it today, but he said if he were operating today, he just couldn't in the regulatory environment because of all the restrictions. And this is one thing that the president has taken on, and in conjunction with the tax cuts, we're seeing businesses like Julia's and Ebonique starting up new businesses. So, I mean, these dereg and tax cuts do go hand in hand in this pro-growth, you know, unleashing of the economy that we're seeing. You know, a rising tide lifts all boats, and that includes the millennial boat. There's going to be more opportunity and more opportunities to start businesses, which I know a lot of the people in this audience are looking to do, are interested to do. And so with that, I'd like to go to Jared Meyer. Where's Jared?
Thanks for
Hello, Jared.
taking the time to be with us today.
Great name.
I know, yeah. I swear, I get so many Google alerts now from your husband. But anyways, I'm a senior fellow with the Foundation for Government Accountability, which is a group that moves individuals from welfare to work. And my question is, an increasing number of millennials want to work for themselves in the 21st century American economy. And these benefits of independent work are clear. You have flexibility, mobility, the ability to take advantage of new technologies. So what's the administration doing to help millennials achieve these entrepreneurial dreams that they have?
Well, let me address that in a very specific way. One of the challenges, I think, to sort of becoming an entrepreneur is it can be scary sometimes, right? You go to work for someone, you're getting a paycheck, you have benefits, you know, where your health care is coming from. But if you're on your own, right? And I think sometimes we make that incredibly difficult. And let's take healthcare, for example. There are now 11 million individuals and their families that are working in small businesses or for themselves that don't have health care through their employer. And that's such a major issue because if you're thinking about leaving your employer to start your own business, for millennials, maybe a little bit less of an issue, but as folks start families, this becomes a major issue. How are you going to access health care? So the president is very, very sensitive about this and really wants to provide more opportunities for individuals to access health care. And so he's directed all the cabinet officers to look at how we can improve this situation. At the Department of Labor, we have proposed a new rule. It's called an association health plan or a small business health plan. And the concept is that entrepreneurs can get together in associations, and they can obtain health care through those associations. So chambers of commerce, associations of entrepreneurs. If folks are setting up an eBay store, maybe an association of eBay stores, to access health care. And I think this could be transformative because if we can lower those barriers to individuals going off on their own and sort of pursuing their dreams, to creating those small businesses, not only are you helping those individuals and their families, but going back to what I was saying before, as those businesses develop, they're going to hire more folk. And you're going to start seeing a multiplier effect throughout our economy. And that's why we're growing so much, because President Trump is very focused on unleashing the innovation that I think is inherent in this nation, and particularly, you know, in the millennial generation that has so many ideas. Now, we, as members of the administration, need to provide the opportunities for them to implement those ideas by lowering the barriers to entry to become entrepreneurs.
Agreed, and I would just follow up with noting the great work being done at the SBA by Administrator McMahon. She started as a small business owner. She understands the challenges of growing a business. She's given great energy and tremendous leadership to that agency. And the mission of increasing access to capital, access to networks, access to mentorship for entrepreneurs is a mandate that she is deeply inspired by and is just really leveraging that agency to do incredible work. So just to give you an example, in 2017 alone, year over year relative to the year prior, she lent $130 million more to women-led businesses. So increasing lending opportunities, particularly to populations that have unique barriers, women and minorities, is a big focus of hers, but also creating opportunities to gain mentorship and to allow the SBA. They have these incredible entrepreneurship facilities across the country that can provide guidance. And sometimes for a young entrepreneur, especially so many women-led businesses, there's one employee, and that's the founder. So who do they go to get advice and feedback on a business plan? And the SBA has some great programs, and she's refining them and scaling them. She's also thinking about digital connections and the opportunity to use the SBA platform to provide programming and knowledge for entrepreneurs and feedback and networking opportunities for young entrepreneurs in leveraging technology. So the SBA is doing great work, and the administration is working very, very closely with Linda McMahon to continue to do that, so that as people start new businesses, they get the guidance and they have access to the capital needed to do so.
No, it can be scary going out on your own, especially if you just graduated from college. And so the SBA does provide tremendous resources for those willing to take that risk.
Their SCORE program's a great example of that, where they have real people who are experienced in those industries providing guidance and reviewing business plans and offering constructive feedback to entrepreneurs as they develop their plans and think about strategies for scaling their business. So there have been some very successful programs, and she's launching new ones and refining and enhancing those that exist that are providing a great service.
That's cool. David Grasso.
Hi, my name is David Grasso. I'm here representing a nonprofit that's dedicated to millennial economic empowerment. I have a live Facebook Live show on Bold TV, right here with Miss Carrie. We interview entrepreneurs, and a lot of times I see that not only do they face a lot of barriers to entry, and not only do they need mentorship, that's all important, but they're also tomorrow's job creators. And we have to see the link between entrepreneurship and jobs. So what is the administration doing to make sure that entrepreneurs not only succeed, but also create jobs?
Well, thank you, and I think we need to recognize that these entrepreneurs are the job creators. I often get a question: isn't changing technology going to decrease the number of jobs available? And I always say, people have been saying that for centuries, and every single time when technology changes, more jobs are created. And so you're seeing technology now empowering these entrepreneurs to access this global economy, to sell what they're producing and manufacturing, to access customers and clients over the internet to give advice. A dietitian in one state can now access, licensing issues aside, the entire nation. But I think there are a few areas where we need to look. We've already touched a little bit about lowering the barriers in terms of healthcare. We've talked a little bit about the tax issues and how treating small businesses in a more positive way is unleashing a lot of innovation among entrepreneurs. But I think we also need to talk about licensing. And let me tell you why. There was a time in the United States when most people didn't need a license to work. Now, almost 1 in 3 individuals need a license to do something really simple, to work. And so there's one city that I'm thinking about that recently licensed dog walking and dog sitting. And what I heard is this. What I heard is that there's an app. How many of you heard of the app called Rover? So you all know about it, right? Kind of like an Airbnb for dog walking and dog sitting. Well, right after Rover came out, all of a sudden they decided that only licensed individuals can dog sit. And so why are they doing that? You didn't need that for health and safety because dog sitting was safe for, pretty much centuries. You can babysit without a license.
Depends what kind of dog.
Depends what kind of dog. But why are they doing this? And so one of the things that I think is really important to empower entrepreneurs is to deal with this issue of occupational licensing. Why are we restricting competition? And that's such a hard issue because these are state and city and local issues. But we need to work with these localities because it is unfair, it is restrictive, and every time there is a new innovative idea, what you are seeing is a barrier to change. Folks don't like change. But there's so many ideas out there and our economy is changing, so we should be embracing those changes. And at the Department of Labor, we're working with so many governors that are trying to really reform this occupational licensing issue. I think that's very important.
Secretary Acosta has been such an unbelievable, formidable champion on the issue of licensure, and it's gotten totally out of control. So I've got my master's degree from Secretary Acosta on this issue, and now I share his passion for it. But it really is remarkable how insane it's become. Now 1 in every 5 professions require a license. That was definitely not true 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it is disproportionately hurting those who can least afford it, and really putting a ceiling on people's potential for upward mobility. So it is a very serious issue. We've talked extensively about how to engaging governors, and the Secretary has done a great job in championing compacts between states in certain professions. For example, military spouses are a group that are disproportionately affected by the licensure problem because of the frequency in which they move. 92% of all military spouses are female. They move roughly every 3 years, and they're concentrated in terms of the jobs that they have in highly licensed fields such as education and the healthcare fields. And so it's enormously problematic, and as a result, you see a 16% unemployment rate of military spouses actively seeking jobs versus, which is, much higher than the national average. So thinking about how it affects individual groups, such as military spouses, and the population as a whole. But it's a major issue, and it requires us tackling it with the governors and with the state representatives, because most often this is happening on a state and local level. But we are bringing and elevating awareness around the consequence and how much this stymies opportunities, particularly those who need the jobs the most.
That's right. Let me add to that, if I could, because it's so important. Ivanka hosted a roundtable of military spouses to talk about this, and I want to share 2 stories. I was struck by one woman there who's an attorney, and when she moved, she was told that she should get a job at a store because she couldn't practice as a lawyer in that state. And she's invested a lot of time in that degree and a lot of money in that degree. And she moved. Do you keep your family unit intact and move with your military spouse? Or do you break up your family unit and keep your profession? There was another individual there who every time she moved, a school teacher, and every time she moved, she had to start at the bottom of the ladder and relicense. We talk about we need more teachers. So why are we making it so difficult for teachers to move? There's a third example that I became aware of that we're looking at, and it involves a dietitian. And so a military service member moved from one state to another, and the spouse is a dietitian. And she wants to continue providing diet advice over the internet, right? With email and FaceTime. You don't need to see people in person nowadays. But she can't do that because she doesn't have a license in the state that she's in. So she had a license in this state. She had clients in this state, and she cannot give advice to those clients. We've got to reform this.
Yeah, I mean, and not only does it take time, and it's a lot of money too, especially I was at that round table, and to get relicensed in another state, sometimes it's cost prohibitive. So not only does it discourage work, it becomes unaffordable to a lot of these families. We'll go on to our next question. Alexandra Baker.
Hi, and thank you for this opportunity to be here with you today. In 2016, I was inspired as I heard you fight to pledge to create a nationally paid for family leave program. And I stand with you in my belief that I think that this should be viewed as an investment in American families and not as just another entitlement. So my question to you, as a newly married woman in a room full of millennials who are all probably going to be parents in the coming years, could you please just speak about what you envision for this policy, and also talk a little bit about the legislative strategy that you plan to employ to build conservative consensus and support in the Senate?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. So we are the only country in the developed world and the only country in the world aside from Papua New Guinea that does not have job-protected maternity leave in the event of the birth of a child. And this is a problem. This is a policy whose time has come and is in fact long overdue. So we're working with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to create consensus and to create momentum for a plan, which will require compromise. It will require a compromise on both sides. It's been 25 years since FMLA was enacted, and we're still at 0 weeks of paid family leave. But I think when you think about this issue and you think about what's happening in our economy and the changing nature of our households, the reality is that 47% of the workforce is female. In the vast majority of homes, all parents work. The homes with children, all parents work. So the nature of work is changing, the nature of our homes are changing, and I think we have to be thinking about not only how we support the American worker, but how we support the American family and enable them to thrive, and that takes many forms. Paid family leave is critically important. And I do not view it as an entitlement either. I think it more than pays for itself by maintaining somebody's attachment to the workforce, by enabling them a short-term ability to bond with a child or an ill family member, and then return to their job and not fall off the track. And actually for the people who need it the most, they're the least likely to receive it. And oftentimes after having a child, they'll go on a social welfare program because they can't afford not to. And that's far more expensive than a responsible national paid family leave program. So I'm very proud of the fact that this administration and this president put in his budget, in both of his budgets, an allocation for a national plan. That's the first time in history. There's never been one before. And we're working with members on both sides of the aisle to make it a reality and build consensus. But there is great momentum for this moving forward. A few other things that I would add to that discussion is also the importance of early childhood education, high quality early childhood education, and childcare accessibility and availability for working families and working parents. And that will be disproportionately impactful to women who are more likely to step out of the workforce to provide unpaid care, whether for a child or an adult dependent. So in tax reform, the addition of an expansion, the doubling of the child tax credit is something that we feel very, very strongly about and will provide real relief to working parents at a time when they need it the most, when they're raising children. The doubling of the standard family deduction, critical. The child or the dependent care credit for those taking care of adult dependents, that's a new credit that was created in recognition of the challenge of caring for an adult dependent and the strain that takes. But also in the Omni that came out today, something that the administration has been advocating very strongly for, there is a vast expansion of the child care and development block grants to the states. We believe that the states are best equipped to know which programs are working and support their workforces. But there was an expansion from $2.8 billion to $5.2 billion in this child care and development block grant. So supporting American working families and the modern American working families, supporting child care, investing in our children too, because being in stimulus-rich environments is so critical for their development. We spend so much as a country trying to remediate and trying to get a student on the right track when they've fallen behind, when they're in 8th grade, when they're in 9th grade, and they're not at the level they need to be. And we don't focus nearly enough on that really critical period between ages 0 to 5, where the parent, who's often in the early phases of their career, has the least resources, has the least flexibility in their own schedule, and has the least options. So making sure that the child during that explosive period of growth and development is in an enriching environment, and that the parent has the support they need at those early stages of their career, we believe is very critical. So I am optimistic that we will accomplish the goal of creating a law and a national paid family leave plan. We're working very, very hard to do exactly that. But there are many ways in which we're supporting the working family through our administration's working family agenda. And some of it's being realized legislatively, and other actions we're taking administratively to do just that. So thank you for the question.
Let me underscore a few points that Ivanka made. First, Ivanka has been such a champion for this issue. She lives it, she breathes it. She has gone out of her way to research it, to advocate, to convince some that were skeptical. And she's made some amazing arguments that are right on point. And I want to start with one that I think we need to amplify. This is a conservative principle. We believe in families, and we believe that families need to be together. And what more can you do to support a family than give them the opportunity, when there is a baby in the household, to early on nurture and care for that child without it negatively impacting their career? We want that nurturing, but we also want to maintain that attachment to the workforce so that individuals can go back and work and produce. Now, from an economic perspective, if we are investing in individuals, what better individual to invest in than someone in their early years? Because if they're on the right path, if they develop and learn early on, that's going to pay back over a lifetime. And so a little bit of early investment is conservative and has an amazing return. And that's why this is such an important issue.
And it's quite frightening when you look at the data, because the fertility rate in this country has plummeted to an all-time low. We have the highest rate of SIDS of any country in the developed world. Most families don't have the luxury of taking unpaid leave, or it comes at a tremendous cost in terms of job loss or going into debt. So they're going back to work and oftentimes leaving their children in environments that are unsafe because it's the environment they can afford. In many states, daycare centers won't take a child until they're at least 12 weeks of age. So what is a family to do? Especially a single-parent household. So we really need to be thinking about how we support that infant and that child, and also keep the attachment to the workforce and enable somebody to continue their career. And we think we have some very creative solutions to do that in a fiscally responsible way.
Lauren Cooley for the next question.
Thank you so much for having us here today. I'm the Red Alert Politics section editor at the Washington Examiner, which covers higher education. I also have a college speaking tour called Make Campus Great Again. And lastly, I'm a mentor for a high school robotics team through the FIRST Robotics program. So clearly, I care a lot about seeing young people in America succeed. So my question, as the tuition inflation continues to skyrocket, how is the Trump administration making sure that the price of a college degree does not outweigh the value of that degree, specifically in getting a job in one's own field where they've actually had expertise and training?
It's a great question, and it's an increasing problem. Obviously, the price of college tuition has gone up dramatically over recent decades, yet we've been in an environment where there was less opportunity. That is changing now. this administration is growing the economy. We see it in GDP growth. We see it in wage growth. We see it in the growth of new businesses. Actually, in 2009, for the first time in history, there were more businesses that were closing than startups, which obviously did not bode well for the next generation coming out of college and into the workforce. But I think we're also thinking and fundamentally taking a step back and asking what is the end goal and what is the purpose of education. And the purpose of education is equipping somebody with the skills, both the EQ skills, but also the actual skills to secure a family-sustaining job and a career. And for a lot of people, that does not mean four-year college. And we're making it permissible again. We're talking about how there are many path A's depending on your own profile and your own passions and your own interests. And that's why we've been such advocates for technical education, vocational education, industry-driven apprenticeships, where people have the opportunity to learn while they earn and come into the workforce debt-free in a field that will enable them to be employed over the long term. We're creating those opportunities for growth through infrastructure. We're making sure that the apprenticeship opportunities and the workforce development opportunities align with the industries that need employees. You see a dearth of young people entering fields such as manufacturing. The same in the STEM fields. There just aren't enough graduates to go into the fields. So part of it is educating students about this is where we think the opportunity is going. This is what we think the work of the future is. So they can make wise decisions if they're going on to four-year college or beyond about where they are directing themselves and what degrees they're actually obtaining. But also we're opening up, we're hoping to refine and reauthorize the Perkins Act. We're hoping to extend Pell funding to shorter duration programs and to encourage dual degrees in high schools. The program that I visited in Waukee, Iowa was absolutely incredible because you have these juniors and seniors and they're getting real life work experience and then going and working for the same employers who designed the programs that they were training in. So I think making it permissible for people to go a route other than just four-year college will be very helpful. And then ensuring that people are educated on the job openings that are available. There's a lot we can do with big data on this front. I mean, really, we haven't leveraged data enough to show people where there are job vacancies and therefore, and what skills training programs they need to fill those jobs or what requirements are available to fill those jobs. So we're working on leveraging big data to do that, but we think that there's tremendous opportunity to better align those skills with the jobs that are available.
Secretary, do you have anything to add?
So let me embrace all of the points that Ivanka made. She and I have worked very closely on these issues. They're incredibly important. And let me try to personalize it to all of you in the following way. How many of you have done or know someone that has done a semester abroad? Okay, just about everyone in this room. Now I want you all to think about everything you learned on that semester abroad. If you want to be a police officer and you're studying criminology, why can't you do a semester at a police academy for credit? Are we really saying that you would learn less by doing a semester at a police academy? I'm not criticizing one. I'm just talking about providing optionality. And I think we have isolated education from the workforce. And so what we've talked about is demand-driven education, right? Education that responds to the skills that are being demanded by the workplace. And young Americans deserve to know in high school, if we want to follow this career path, this is our job opportunities, and this is how much we might make. This is the amount of loans that we'll have, and this is the debt. Or we can follow this other career path where we'll have a job more immediately, where we may not have debt. And later on, we can perhaps pursue other things, perhaps pursue that college degree. Or perhaps that degree should have in it a skill component, right? There is nothing to say that you can't learn and earn simultaneously. Yet somewhere along the way, we have said that education should be isolated from the workplace. And there's no reason, if you look at Europe, if you look at so many nations, they have integrated it through apprenticeship programs. They've integrated it through certificate programs and shorter duration programs, like Ivanka mentioned, which is why this administration is looking to expand Pell to those. And you know, this is not that unusual. What happens in medical school? Someone learns anatomy and they learn to tie a knot. So why can't we apply that across the board to all professions? Why can't we have apprenticeships? Why can't we have semesters in the workforce for credit? And just give individuals the full array of options.
And what we're also seeing is that people who experience an apprenticeship program are much more likely to work in that field. So for example, 50% of women who graduate with a degree in STEM don't end up going into a STEM field. If they've had an apprenticeship, that number goes up to 95%. So attaching the education with a real work, real life application is proving to be very, very effective in terms of creating that link between education and workforce, education and labor that has been so sorely missing. So you're right, Europe's given us some great examples. Switzerland has been great on this front. Germany, a full 1/3 of the German workforce goes through a formal apprenticeship program, and we've learned much from them. And Secretary Acosta, Secretary DeVos, Secretary Ross from Commerce, we've all worked very hard to think about how we can bring these industry-led credentials, create these industry-led credentials to expand apprenticeship in a model that mirrors what they're doing successfully overseas. And we're just at the beginning of that, but have been driving it very, very hard. And the task force you've established on this front is doing some excellent work that is very scalable. So we're looking forward to creating many, many more opportunities through that in the months and years to come.
Well, I think we have time for one more question. We'll make it quick. Justin Dent.
Hey all, thank you for a wonderful conversation so far. I'm the executive director of an organization called Generation Financial Knowledge Development. We work across the country teaching students the skills they need to thrive in 21st century careers, which we so often know they don't really get in college. You know, we've done a lot of work with students across the country on their economic sentiment, and we found that while economic sentiment among millennials has greatly improved under the current administration's policies, millennials are still having a difficult time finding jobs and the jobs that they want. More than 20% of millennials still say they have difficulty finding jobs, and according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, millennials are still 50% more likely to be unemployed than similar cohorts 35 to 54. So my question for both of you is, what is this administration doing to pursue more pro-growth policies for jobs directed towards millennials?
Well, I think President Trump's priorities on this are pretty clear. Jobs, more jobs, and then even more jobs. It's crystal clear. And let me say, there are 6.3 million open jobs in this economy right now. The jobs are there. The unemployment rate's at 4.1% and dropping. The issue, and I want to bring it back to the education system. I had the privilege of speaking to the boards of trustees of a large state university system recently. And this state's doing really well. It's number 2 in the nation in terms of college graduation rates. 68% of students that start in this state graduate within 6 years. Number 2 in the nation. And of those, 63% find a job that pays decently. Number 2 in the nation. 68 times 63 is less than 50%. So here's the question. Are universities teaching the skills that are being demanded by the current workforce? Are universities serving the students well? And so this cycles back to working with the universities and the colleges and those institutions that are offering skills to ensure that when you sign up, you are told you can follow this career path and these are your job options. You can follow this career path and these are the even better job options, and you can follow this career path and you're going to do really well. Now choose. And unfortunately, that emphasis on preparing individuals for family-sustaining jobs is not out there. And so the economy has the jobs. And I'll tell you, employers, job creators are asking us, where can we find individuals to hire? The issue is, are individuals being given the opportunity to acquire those skills? No, actually, that's not the issue. The issue is, are individuals being given the information that they need to choose the right opportunities to acquire those skills? And that's where I see that we need a lot of change.
And I'll just layer a couple more things onto that. I think licensure, again, is a big issue because we have these job openings. We know that we don't have enough welders. And yet there are welders in the country that are unemployed but can't move. So, you know, the licensure issue is problematic in this regard because the workforce often can't move to where the work is with great ease. Another challenge in mobility in this country is the cost of childcare. A lot of people are unable to move away from their communities because if their mother-in-law isn't in the neighborhood, they can't afford the cost of childcare to and be able to have a dual income household. So that is another barrier. Opioids is another major barrier. When you think about the jobs that are going unfilled in this country, and I believe that you have a panel that's going to be addressing exactly that, but many of the job openings that are going unfilled is because people are failing their drug tests. And we're seeing this, and it's devastating, the epidemic. We have the highest rate of unemployment for prime-aged white men that this country's ever experienced, and a lot of that is the opioid epidemic. So thinking about that in conjunction with skills training to make sure that we are training for the jobs that are available as opposed to educating and then hoping somebody gets a job, with policies that support families and enable both parents to work if they so choose.
Well, I want to thank you both. This has been a very informative panel, and you're so passionate about what you do, and I'm sure that, let's just give them a round of applause.
Thank you, Kelly.
All right, we're going to
Thank you all so much. It was a great group.
Thank you for the questions.
Test, 1, 2, 3, 4. Test, 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that one good? Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we ask that you take your seats. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
So thank you, Mr. President.
Next group.
This is a great audience of millennial leaders from all across the country. So thank you for taking the time to address us today. So this morning you signed some very historic historic piece of regulation against China, and they've been stealing our jobs for many years now. And the critics have said that this will trigger a trade war. I like to say we've been in a trade war for 40 years. So you like to comment?
And losing.
That's right. That's correct. So thank you for what you're doing to stand up for the American worker. Would you like to comment on that and what it means?
Well, it was an honor actually doing it. We had a great news conference a little while ago, and Section 301. It's a very complex pile of words, but honestly, it's very simple. And the simplicity is what makes it beautiful. Look, we've lost, so many factories, probably 60,000 factories. Nobody can even believe it. In fact, when I first heard the number, I said, that can't be real. We lost anywhere from 6 to 7 million jobs over a relatively short period of time. And it's a whole different thing. Now, I have to tell you, they're coming back. Over the last year, we are bringing jobs back. As of about 2 weeks ago, 153 million jobs. It's the highest number of jobs we've ever had in our country. So it is coming back. But we're losing $375 billion with China. It could be $504 billion, depending on the way you count. A lot of different ways of counting, but no matter how you count, it's bad. And we're doing something that will be the start of making trade with China more fair. We're so far down, and our presidents, frankly, our past presidents, should never have allowed this to happen. This has been many, many years. It's sort of like the Middle East. How did that happen? And other things. How did all of these things happen? And North Korea, how did this happen, where it got so bad? I shouldn't be the one negotiating North Korea. This should have been done years ago, Charlie. This should have been done by somebody before they were in the position that they're in right now. But we got stuck with a lot of beauties, but we'll fix them. We'll fix them.
I like to say if a Democrat president accomplished 1/10 of what you've done over the last year, they would say it's historic and it's unbelievable. And so what you've done for the American people to change the trajectory and save this country and our generation is quite phenomenal. So let's talk about tax reform. The Democrats call it crumbs. $1,000 is not crumbs to the young people in this room. It's the biggest middle-class tax cut in American history, but it's also the biggest young person, essentially the millennial tax cut. So talk about the amazing economic benefits that we're seeing thanks to the tax cut package that you championed and you successfully got through Congress.
Okay, Charlie, and a couple of things. The individual mandate was knocked out. By itself, that would be a big bill. Knocking out the individual. This is for Obamacare, where you have the privilege of paying a lot of money so that you don't have to buy bad health care, okay? And we got it knocked out. That was a big thing. And Anwar, we have that approved, which is tremendous in terms of one of the great energy reservoirs in the world. And they've been working on it. Reagan tried, Bush tried. Every president was trying to get it approved. And we got it approved. And that was part of our bill. And then, of course, we have the tremendous tax cuts for people. And I guess if you think about it, millennials starting out, you have a tremendous advantage now over what you had. You're going to pay less taxes. You have far more incentive. You're going to have a lot more money left in your paycheck to spend. And that's part of the beauty. And we're seeing it. And we're seeing the numbers. And, we were at about 1.2% GDP. We've now hit 3 and another 3 and a 3.2. And we'll see what this next quarter is. That could be a good quarter. Our businesses are flourishing. Jobs are now, people are going to have choice, and it's choice of jobs. Before if they got one job, they'd stay there even if they didn't like it because they had no alternative. Now people are going out and they're looking at 5, 6, 7 jobs, and they're making a choice. So that really works out. But young people coming out of college, coming out of even high school, we're trying a very big push for vocational schools. I like the name vocational school, where somebody's good at fixing motors. I remember I'd be in school, in lower schools, and I'd be doing a test, and there'd be somebody on my right who was not too good. This was not a great student. This was not going to be Einstein academically, okay? And yet that person could fix an engine or a motor, so he was incredible, blindfolded. And by the way, that's what he liked. And that's probably, I don't know, we lost track. That's probably what he ended up doing. But he had a great ability at that, far greater than me or far greater than other people. But he'll never be a student, nor did he want that kind of learning, that kind of whatever you want to call it. So we need vocational schools. Now, they call them a lot of times community colleges. I don't think it's an accurate definition. We're having a lot of companies come into the United States. We need workers. And by the way, illegal immigration, which will be probably one part of a question, but I'll give you the answer right now. We want people to come into our country, but we want them to come in based on merit, because we're going to need these people, because we have tremendous numbers of companies coming in, whether it's Chrysler leaving Mexico and coming into Michigan, or Foxconn. You know, Foxconn is going to open up a tremendous place in Wisconsin, and we're very proud of that, because that was a deal that nobody even thought was happening or could happen. Apple, they make a lot of the Apple products. Apple is taking $350 billion, and they're coming into our country with building here. And I said to Tim Cook a long time ago, Tim, it's wonderful, Apple, it's nice, but we want you to build the places here. And he said, because of our tax, because of what we've done, they're actually bringing in about $240 billion, but they're going to be investing $350 billion on new plants and a tremendous campus and lots of other things. So it's very exciting, and very exciting for millennials, very, very exciting for jobs.
Absolutely, and black youth unemployment at an all-time low, Latino youth unemployment at an all-time low.
That's all-time low black unemployment. I'm very proud of that. And Hispanic unemployment, all-time low. Women unemployment, the lowest in 18 years. We're doing great. We're really doing great. And I really believe that, I don't want to sound braggadocious, but I think that there's never been an administration that's done as much as we've done in the first year. You know, if you look at regulations, forget about tax. I think the cutting of the regulations may be as important or more important than even the tremendous tax cuts.
That's right, and you said you would get rid of two regulation for every one, and I think it's now 22 for every one, thanks to your leadership with that.
Turned out to be
it's
22
absolutely
for one.
amazing. It's amazing. And so, shifting gears for a minute here, one of the other things that you've done so successfully during your campaign and presidency is crush political correctness. And what the college network that we represent, I represent an organization on 1,200 college and high school campuses, it's harder than ever to espouse support of your presidency and the ideas that you're fighting for. So thank you for what you're doing to help give us the courage of our convictions to fight against political correctness. But what advice do you have for young patriots and conservatives on campus that support your agenda that are being ridiculed and silenced because of administrators that are clamping down on free speech?
So, Charlie, it's a great question. I think the numbers are actually much different than people think. I think we have a lot of support. If they have one campus or two campuses, and we know what they are, it gets all the publicity. We have campuses where you have a vast majority of people that are perhaps like many of the people in this room. You could call it conservative, you call it whatever you want, but they're people that want free speech. If you look at what's going on with free speech, with the super left, with Antifa, with all of these characters, I'll tell you what, they get a lot of publicity, but you go to the real campuses and you go all over the country, you go out to the Middle West, you go out even to the coast in many cases. We have a tremendous support. I would say we have majority support. I think it's highly overblown. Highly overblown.
I totally agree, and we see it on the ground. And so people say, hey, I'm a Trump supporter. I'm just not allowed to say it because of the culture that's been created by the administrators and the professors. And kind of piggybacking off of that, what you see on college campuses and the speakers being disinvited and, you know, the assault on these ideas, I think it's so important what your administration is doing through the Department of Justice to support these lawsuits to help advance, you know, this free speech movement on campus. So kind of talking generationally in general, this is something that I'm quite curious about, and a lot of people ask me. I consider you to be one of the most successful business people in American history, and your successful presidential run is something that all people, young people included, should look up to. What advice would you give to the 25-year-old Donald Trump, knowing what you know today?
Don't run for president.
But we're glad you did.
You know, I was talking to Mercedes and Sarah walking off, or just to, you know, the Oval Office is right across the street. And I said, all my life I've gotten really, you know, look, we all get every once in a while a knock, but I got the greatest publicity. I was getting such great until I ran for office. But it's been, people get it. People really do get it. There is a lot of fake news out there. Nobody had any idea. And, I'm actually proud of the fact that I exposed it to a large extent, because we exposed it. It's an achievement. And you have some great news. And, when I say fake, I don't mean everybody, not every one of those many people back there. I just say we have shown something that a lot of people didn't really understand. If you look at approval rating, their approval rating is, sorry folks, it's down the tubes, because people have found out how dishonest it is. However, you have some great reporters. You have some great people in the press, people that I have tremendous respect for, and it is that way also, and that's very important. And it's also reassuring to know that, that's the fact.
Absolutely, and your capacity to be able to fight back against the press. And look, they say, they talk about your approval ratings. These are the same people that said you were going to lose in a landslide victory, and now we're supposed to believe these approval rating polls.
Well, I think, a lot of the polls are not real, too, because there were a couple of them got us right, but a lot of them didn't, and a lot of them purposely didn't, because, they set an expectation when they give you a certain poll. People say, oh, gee, I think I'm not going to vote. I love Trump, but he's not going to be able to make it. So they'll go to a movie and they'll say, we'll go home and we'll watch later. And they go home and they watch and they say, gee, if only we voted. But they really voted. In 2016, they came out and they voted. There was nobody that stayed home. And as you know, the results were far greater than the polls. Now, a lot of people just don't want to talk about it. They say, we love Trump, but we don't have to talk about it. What do we love? We love a strong military. We like low taxes. We like all of the things that are happening now, jobs, tremendous cutting in regulation, all of the things that you see happening right now, they like that. They don't have to talk about it. They went into the booth. And, look, this was the big story. People came out that nobody knew existed. And the Democrats are looking for those people right now. I got a tremendous number of people from the Obama administration where they voted for Obama, President Obama. They voted for him and they voted for me. They voted for Bernie Sanders, a lot of people, and I think because he was right about trade. The difference is I know how to fix the problem, not just talk about it. But he was right, and that's what we're doing. That's why we had the 301 meeting today on China. But Bernie Sanders was very strong on saying that we're getting ripped off on trade. He happened to be right. And I got a lot of Sanders voters. Who would think that? You would think I would have gotten virtually none. But many of them came. That was a big part of the difference between Hillary Clinton and myself. So we have a tremendous amount of support. And it's sort of an interesting thing that sometimes they say you add 9. Whatever Trump's poll number is, add 9. People don't want to talk about it. They don't want to be bothered. But when they get into the voting booth, they say, vote Trump. We gave a speech the other night in Pennsylvania for a very nice guy, Rick Saccone. And it was the level of love in that room was incredible. We were in Pensacola, Florida, a couple of weeks ago. The place is just rocking. Now, I don't know if it's transferable. They say a lot of it's not transferable. They may like me. They may vote for me. They're all saying I'm going to do great in 2020. I mean, let's see what happens, right? But they don't know if it's transferable. I hope it's transferable because we have to do our agenda. We have to win in 18. We have to get the agenda. We need more Republicans. We could also, by the way, get rid of the filibuster situation going on in the Senate. I feel very strongly about that. It would make life a lot easier. But you look at some of the votes, we would get so many more votes. If you could work that with youth, get rid of it, because certain senators just want to keep it, but it makes things a little bit tougher. But I will say we need more Republicans, and we're going to get you taxes. I don't know if you know, but I was with Kevin Brady the other day. We're starting a phase 2 on tax cuts. We're going to get more tax cuts, and we're going to be very focused, again, on the middle class. We're going to get a phase 2 tax cut because it worked so well. Nobody thought it would be like this. It worked so. The word crumbs is going to be like the word deplorable, I think, for Hillary.
Totally agree. And,
hey, Charlie, when she said the word, I was watching that speech, and I thought it was, not very nice, but I didn't see it that bad. And the next day I'm at a speech, and women are coming in, I'm a deplorable, the husband, I'm a deplorable. And I say, what's going on? That word really, and that's right. She actually said, deplorable and irredeemable. Irredeemable's probably worse.
She was reading off a teleprompter.
Well, the one she did last week wasn't too good either. That the woman goes and asks the husband, the son, and the male boss for approval to vote for Trump. That was not too good.
And
That was not too.
She found a way to insult both men and women. She said women can't make decisions on their own, and men are so controlling over women they don't allow to make decisions on their own. Only Hillary could figure out a way to possibly do that. No. Kind of in closing here, I know the next panel we're going to be talking about the crisis on college campuses, but specifically talking about the opioid epidemic, which is something that has just totally devastated middle America. And I know your administration is making historic strides to help fix the issues. So can we talk a little about opioids and what you're doing? To
Yeah,
help
Charlie,
fix that?
so we're going to be putting $6 billion over a fairly short period of time into the opioid crisis. It's a crisis. And you have to include in that the drug crisis period. Drugs are coming across the southern border and coming all over. That's why we will have the wall. We have $1.6 billion toward the wall and fixing up bad walls that are already up and, building them new and rebuilding them, and a lot of work being done. Certain communities, believe it or not, like in San Diego, they want a wall. Nobody likes to talk about that. In fact, I said, don't build the wall there. They're all wanting it. And Jerry Brown, who's doing a terrible job as governor, but, no, if you like high taxes and lots of and crime, that's your guy. But they go and they talk so much about the wall. But in San Diego, as you know, there's a long stretch that is demanding the wall. So I said, okay, we're ready to start. I said, don't build it. We'll wait till we get everything approved, because they're having a lot of pressure. They want the wall. Look, we have to stop the drugs from coming in. So opioids are a big problem. We're going to be we're developing potential litigation to be suing some of these companies. If we could only do a painkiller that's not so addictive. This stuff is brutal. You have a broken arm, you go to the hospital, you're there for a few days, you come out, your arm is fixed, and now you're a drug addict. And we got to do something about it. It's so incredibly addictive and so quickly. And we are working here with research money. We're working and very strongly on coming up with painkillers that aren't so addictive and maybe not addictive at all. And I think that'll be a big thing. The other thing we have to do in terms of the drug problem is we have to be very tough on sentences. And, a drug dealer will kill sometimes more than 2,000 people, sometimes much more than that, ruin families, ruin lives, and they get caught. They'll get 30 days in jail. They'll get a fine, and they won't even get jail. They'll get a year in jail. And yet if they kill somebody, if they shoot somebody, if they get into a fight and somebody dies, they put them in jail for life or they give them the death penalty. But these people kill thousands of people over the course of their lives through drugs. So we're going to have to get much, much tougher in terms of penalty. And if you want to stop it, you look at certain countries where they have, as an example, the death penalty, and say, how's your drug problem? And they will tell you, we don't have much of a drug problem. So I there's nothing to laugh about, nothing to smile about, but when we have these blue ribbon committees composed of some very nice people, many of whom are in the office, Alex and Alex, we have a double Alex and Ivanka. We'll set up a nice, and Kellyanne. Has anybody ever heard of Kellyanne? Huh? She's become... I told Ivanka this morning, you can take Kellyanne and put her right into the heart of the battle to somebody who, the level of hatred back there is so incredible. 7 in the morning, the cameras are on, the lights are on, and she's there, and she'll just take them on. Great courage, really great courage. A lot of people say, please, please. Charlie, it's true. A lot of people say, please, Mr. President, please don't put me in there. She'll say, where do you want me to go, right? It's all words. It's all when you think about it. And here's another great warrior right here. Right, Ivanka? You are a great warrior. Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Really is. Great.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. We're fighting for you, and we can't wait for the next 7 years. So thank you so much.
That'll be great. Thank you. Thank you.
Test, test. Test, test. Test, test.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. That was quite a treat. I have one of the best jobs in the United States of America every day, but I have one of the toughest jobs today going after President Trump. But thank you for sticking with us and for your interest in our final panel today, a discussion with Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar and the Department of Justice's Sarah Isgur Flores. Today we're going to talk about crises, plural, on campus, and we'll have a specific examination of two of those crises, opioids and drugs. And the second one will be about speech on campus, something that Charlie Kirk of Turning Point touched upon in the last panel. So just this past Monday, 2 short days ago, President Trump and members of his cabinet, including Attorney General Sessions and Secretary Azar, went up to New Hampshire, where the president delivered his policy rollout on how to combat the opioid crisis, which we call the crisis next door, and also drugs overall. You hear an awful lot about opioids today, and it's a very serious crisis in our nation, but heroin use is up, meth use is up, all types of illicit drugs coming over our southern border, in our mails, frankly, and elsewise. And if you remember anything about the entire conversation on drugs, I would commend to you one major point, and it's called fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. Most of America suffers from information underload when it comes to the horrors and the dangers and really the toxicity and lethality of fentanyl. It is synthetically produced. It comes into this country through a couple of different ways, and it is got the potency, 50 times the potency of heroin, 100 times the potency of morphine. And what's happening on our college campuses and elsewhere, but since we're talking to you today, I will say on our college campuses, your folks are reading the labels. They won't put any sugar in their body. They don't eat carbs anymore. And they're very, very fastidious about what goes into their body. And then you buy a street drug for $5 or $10. It's laced with fentanyl, and that's it. So I guess my short advice is, as somebody double your age, eat the ice cream, have the French fry. Don't buy the street drug. Believe me, it all works out. Today, you'll hear less of me and more of Sarah and Secretary Azar. But before we start our discussion on both topics, I would like to commend to you a new website here at the White House that the president did announce on stage in New Hampshire on Monday. It's called crisisnextdoor.gov, CRISIS, crisisnextdoor.gov. Basically, everyone across the country is welcome to share their story. And if you share your story with respect to drugs and opioids, whether it is a tragic and very sad tale of woe, whether it's a triumphant story of recovery and treatment, or whether you want to inspire a number of people through a faith-based exercise, or because you know a health professional or somebody in law enforcement. Whatever your story is, we'd like for folks to come and share them. The president went first last October. He shared the story about his brother, and he has since recorded our first outtake on our Share Your Story, our first story, where he tells America we need to cut the stigma and the silence when it comes to drug addiction and drug misuse, and have people come forward and focus on treatment. But we also want to focus on prevention, education, interdiction, and law enforcement, all three at the same time. So before we start the discussion here with Secretary Azar and Sarah, we first would like to share with you a story that came from Mitchell in Missouri since the president announced the website on Monday.
Hello, my name is Mitchell Crosby, and this is my story of addiction. Started back on Halloween night 2012. Had my first drink of alcohol, and man, it really made me come out of my shell. I could talk to women for once. It just did a lot of things for me. Made me feel good. So I drank a lot through high school, and then when I turned 17, I got my wisdom teeth taken out and was prescribed a large amount of oxycodone painkillers, and I really enjoyed those too. They made me feel wonderful. It kind of made me feel how alcohol did, made me feel great. So I continued to take those. You know, I started to buy them off the street, and I had no idea of the consequences that were to come. I would run out. My supply would run out, and I would get really sick. They call it being dope sick. And then eventually, you know, those pills got expensive, so I turned to heroin, cheaper, much cheaper. And then they started to put fentanyl in the heroin. So it was a rough ride. It was 5 years of active addiction. And then finally, I had a couple overdoses and reached out for help. And to this day, I've got 6.5 months clean. And the only reason is from help from other alcoholics and drug addicts, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and the God of my understanding. If you take anything from this video, it's to reach out for help. I tried to do it alone, and I needed help. Best decision I've made. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank those in the White House who are vetting these stories and receiving them. Along with Mitchell and the president, we've had the Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, Eric Bolling. We've had Darryl Strawberry and some others share their story. And we, as you can see from Mitchell, we're not looking for fancy lighting or professionally done videos. It could be as raw and real as one wants to make it. So please share the idea that one can share their story, and we'll keep going. Secretary Azar, you were there with us in New Hampshire on Monday. You were called up to the podium, and I thought that gave great illustration to how involved the president's administration really has been on the front lines of tackling the drug epidemic. Why don't you share with us a little bit about the confidence you have that the president's three-pronged plan will actually bend the curve in the right direction, and if you'd like to say anything specifically about how this impacts our college campuses. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Kellyanne. I think to understand why the plan works and why the president's action is so historic here, you have to really understand what happens with the opioid epidemic. It's very different than anything else that you have in the stereotype you would have about drugs or drug addiction. Most people who get addicted are getting addicted because they went to a doctor, not because they went to a drug dealer. They had pain. They had a broken ankle. They had their wisdom teeth taken out. And they were given a prescription for legal opioids to deal with pain. They were given too much, too many days. They became addicted for reasons we don't fully understand, why one person becomes addicted and another person does not, but they do. Then you run out. And eventually your doctor, your pharmacy, your insurance company cuts you off. Then you move to street versions of those legal opioids. Then that's too expensive. You move to the cheaper black tar heroin, and God help you, you move to fentanyl. And then you're fully deep into the cycle of addiction, and then it's overdoses, hopefully survival, recovery, prevent you from relapse if we can. So you have to think about that continuum. And the president has said we're going to try to stop this right at the beginning. The first element is preventing the intake into the cycle of addiction by stopping the overuse of legal prescription opioids. So within 3 years, we will cut by 1/3 the number of legal opioid prescriptions in this country. We are currently prescribing and using 3 times the legal prescription opioids that we did in 1999. Now, a lot has happened in 20 years, but we aren't 3 times more in pain. So something is fundamentally very wrong in how we're practicing medicine, pharmacy, everything else. So he said, we're going to stop that. We're going to educate. One of the big things we're going to do is a mass multimedia campaign, and elements of that are going to be really geared towards the millennial generation. It's going to be science-based, evidence-based, how we will target and educate to say stop it right at the beginning. Don't get started on these legal opioids. And if you find opioids in your parents' cabinet or in the kitchen, don't get them, but actually go to your parent and say, take them to the pharmacy, take them to the doctor, take them to the hospital, and get them out of the house. Do not keep any excess legal opioids in your house. Use the minimum necessary. And if you have to, push back with your doctor and say, why do I need this? Is there something that's non-opioid that I could be using instead? We're doing massive, multi-hundreds of millions of dollars of R&D at the National Institute of Health and the CDC to develop alternative types of treating pain that do not involve opioids, as well as working in a public-private partnership with industry to try to develop non-opioid painkillers. Then we're doing law enforcement. Sarah will probably do a better job talking about what we're doing on the law enforcement front. That's the second thing. How do we stop the illicit, that heroin, that fentanyl getting in the country, getting around the country? And then third, what's compassionate treatment so we can help people pull out of that cycle of addiction and stay out of that addiction? It's hitting every generation, but the millennial generation's getting hit very hard. You know, among ages 25 to 34, drug overdose is the #1 cause of death from injury. From age 15 to 24, drug overdose is the #3 cause of death from injury. Car accidents is #1. Just give you a sense of proportion. And that's direct impact on that generation. Talk about parents, grandparents, okay? Siblings, all in that. 116 Americans are dying every single day from opioid overdose. 116 every single day. I met a young girl in Dayton, 17 years old, just a couple weeks ago. Her sister died of opioid overdose. Her mother died of opioid overdose. Her father died of opioid overdose. She was put in the care of her grandmother, who was an opioid addict, who died of complications from use of opioids. This young lady became an opioid addict. She was 7 weeks clean when I met her. She was living in a group home, and she was hoping to graduate from high school. I don't know how she's keeping it going, honestly, with all that. I don't know how the strength she has to even, she was smiling, optimistic, hopeful. God bless her. I hope it works. But that's that generation. It's shocking in its impact.
And it's why we call it the crisis next door, because we know everyone has been impacted in some way. Would you just, for a very brief moment, Secretary Azar, please explain that this is different than the 28 million or so chronic pain sufferers who rely upon pain medication? We're talking about something different here. If you can clarify, because I do think there's confusion that somehow all painkillers will be removed from the market.
Right. First, these are opioids. These are a particular type of painkiller. And also, of course, nobody's talking about removing them from the market. It's how do we ensure that the least quantity possible are used for the medical condition and for the individual and under appropriate tight supervision and with appropriate caution and warning. There are many people who suffer from chronic pain, especially folks who have cancer, people suffering from terminal illness. And we always have to balance that. We have to be very careful. And so that's all of our plans involve a sensitivity to those who are suffering from pain. But part of our research is also building the evidence base that there is more than simply opioids to deal with pain. And we want to build the evidence around non-opioid types of treatment, whether maybe for some individuals physical therapy, maybe other alternative therapies are appropriate. For some, there have been recent peer-reviewed studies recently that show that some of the over-the-counter medicines that are available for pain can, for the right individual and in the right circumstance, be as effective an analgesic as an opioid medicine. Okay? We have just gotten into the habit, patient says pain, hand them a script for a cheap opioid prescription. So we've got to rethink the medical profession, the pharmacy, pharma, all have to rethink how we practice medicine around pain. Pain is important. We don't want people in pain, but we cannot have the go-to be the script pad and writing a quick 90-day supply and patient go, you know, you're taken care of, go away. And that's the end of it. That cannot be how we practice medicine, and the medical profession doesn't want to practice medicine that way either. So we need to work together, pharmacy, providers, the farm industry, regulators, all together, insurers. How do we make it the least quantity possible and only in the right circumstance?
Thank you very much, Secretary Azar. Sarah Flores at Department of Justice, you've also been an amazing partner for this White House and this administration's effort to try to combat the opioid crisis and drug supply, drug demand. And the supply piece is very important too, whether it's shutting down the dark web or announcing the first indictments of Chinese nationals for fentanyl trafficking. I feel like every day I read something else someone at the Department of Justice has done to try to improve upon, our efforts to disrupt the flow of drugs into our community. If you can also tell us what the Department of Justice is doing. Attorney General Sessions was also there on Monday. I've been to the Department of Justice when you have been the person in charge of these press conferences where real significant actions have been announced and efforts undertaken. If you would highlight them for us today. And thank you for being here, Sarah.
Well, sure, and Kellyanne is a wonderful partner in this. I think the president has done so much to highlight this. As you said, it's the crisis next door that people aren't, it's so prevalent we're not talking about it almost. So at the Department of Justice, we obviously handle the law enforcement side, and it has become a singular focus of Attorney General Sessions. So he is actually in Tallahassee today talking about opioids. Tomorrow he'll be visiting a prenatal unit of opioid-addicted babies who are born addicted, which I believe there's 25 a day right now being born addicted to opioids, and the pain and withdrawal that they have to go through to become healthy little babies. And last week, we met with 10 families who had lost their children to opioid addiction, and the stories were so similar to what you're describing, how they start the process, then you get to fentanyl, overdoses, treatment, overdose again. And these parents and the heartbreak in their eyes, for anyone out there, do think of your parents, and I have sat next to them, and like he said, reach out for help. At DOJ, just today, actually, we announced 2 more cases, one in Toledo, where they had taken 3 pounds of fentanyl off the street, and as the U.S. attorney there pointed out, that is enough to kill everyone in Toledo several times over, and that's 3 pounds of fentanyl. In San Diego, they took 77 pounds of fentanyl today. If that gives you some indication of what's coming over the border, it is why what the president talks about with border security is so important. This is not a political talking point. This is about lives. So, that's just today at what 2 offices in the Department of Justice did. We also have our J-Code task force, which looks at darknet marketplaces. We shut down Alpha Bay last year, the largest darknet that was selling illicit fentanyl. A couple of 13-year-old boys ordered some drugs off Alpha Bay, and one of them died overdosing on that. He was 13 and had ordered this on this darknet site. So we have people dedicated just to finding those sites, taking them down, making sure that no one can get their hands on these drugs. We have our pill task force, which looks at the doctors and the prescriptions. Many of these doctors are prescribing for true pain and people who need them, but that's not always the case. we indicted 50 doctors in our healthcare takedown last year, the largest healthcare takedown in history. There were 400 defendants total, but 50 of those were doctors, and a lot opioid related. So that's just a small piece of all we're doing, but we are sending resources to this problem every day. One thing I will plug that you mentioned is our DEA Take Back Days. Our next one is on April 25th. There will be locations around the country where you can turn in your opioids to a single place. So yeah, if your parents have opioids in the cabinet, or if you do, frankly, we're, you know, wisdom teeth age, find one of those and bring it in and meet some of your friendly DEA agents in the neighborhood. They're really nice, and the dogs are fantastic. They're really friendly. They say don't pet them, but just ask, it'll be fine.
Thank you, Sarah. In fact, last Take Back Day, October 28th, witnessed the largest collection ever, 950,000 pounds of little pills. Think about that. It approximated the weight of 3 Boeing 757s. And the president had made it the centerpiece of his weekly radio address that weekend, and 2 days before Take Back Day, he and the First Lady had delivered their joint policy address on this topic, where he was able to mention it as well. So it really is peer-to-peer and community leader to community leader just to talk about bringing back these drugs. My own goal, and we're working on it, would be to have Take Back Day be every day, or certainly more frequently than twice a year, because we should just have this ongoing ability, and some hospitals do have an ongoing ability for one to bring drugs to be safely disposed, no questions asked. And so that's very exciting. I think we should turn to the questions in the audience. So let's begin with Thomas Farrell, the chair of the Ohio College Republicans. Hi.
Well, first, thank you all for being here. As you mentioned, I'm the chair of the Ohio College Republican Federation. I'm also a student at the University of Dayton. As you mentioned, Secretary, Dayton has been hit really hard. It's one of the worst cities in the country. Recently, the DOJ actually gave $2.9 million in a grant to Southern Ohio to deal with this, and a lot of Southern Ohio is rural. So as somebody who has seen a lot of Southern Ohio and seen how the crisis has affected all of Ohio, I'm curious to hear what the DOJ and the administration as a whole is doing to combat the opioid epidemic, especially in rural areas.
Thank you, Thomas. Great question. The DA actually, and this all gets a pretty technical, not that interesting maybe, but it is so important. So the DEA just opened a new unit out of Kentucky. They have regional centers, and they've created a new region. It's the first time that's happened in a long time. And it's specifically to do what you're talking about, which is to look at the opioid epidemic in these rural areas. We know where this is hitting hardest. These heat maps, first of all, the whole country is getting pretty hot on the heat maps, but it is really centered in a lot of these rural areas. So it is about surging resources there. It's about getting DEA agents on the ground and getting prosecutors on the ground. So we also have moved 12 prosecutors into that area. I believe that the Dayton office got one as well. And they have started, their full-time job is these prosecutions, and we've already started seeing indictments coming in from these prosecutors. And first of all, they love their jobs, and a prosecutor who loves their jobs gets a lot of indictments. And so they are very pleased to send me their press releases when they get them. And it's exciting. You know, 12 people can make this huge difference in this crisis. So I guess to answer your question, we have a lot of resources moving to rural areas, but as a thought for all of you, if 12 prosecutors can make this much of a difference that I'm seeing, think about what you can do in your community, because I promise there's quite a lot.
Also, the rural challenge is a real challenge, especially in terms of treatment. And so one of the things that the president, as part of his plan, has asked Congress to do is to appropriate money for a special rural treatment program. So $150 million is part of that package that we dedicated it for rural treatment, on top of almost $500 million of extra funding for our community health centers, which serve rural and urban environments there to ensure that we've got adequate treatment for folks. You know, I was just down visiting when I was there in the Dayton area, a place called Bridget's Path, which is one of these neonatal abstinence syndrome facilities. And just remarkable work that they're doing there for these babies. You know, we've got to build the evidence base even. We're still learning even how to care for an opioid addicted baby. There's not science on this. We are studying this at NIH right now. How does one do that? Whether it's medically assisted treatment or, I mean, one of the therapies is actually just holding and comforting the baby. That's how little we know about how to try to deal with this infant in pain. And I got to be with a young mother there and her baby, who was just, I guess, about a month and a half old. The mother was recently out of treatment, was clean for now, and just the miraculous work being done by a facility like that. We've got to, of course, get more NAS-type facilities out there. And then we've got Ohio, one of the things we do in every state, just had a meeting with our acting director of the CDC today with some of our leading public health officials around something we call prescription drug monitoring programs. So these are databases where when you get an opioid prescription, it goes in the database. Almost every state has it. Pretty soon every state will have one. Goes in there. When you shop, you get refused by one doctor or you get a prescription at one, and you go to another doctor, you go doctor shopping, they have to look up and see under your name, and they'll find out you have been shopping, they'll find out you've got a script already. One of the things the president's calling for is that those prescription drug monitoring programs be wired together across the country, so you can't be in Indiana and just run down to Tennessee and get a script on top of the one you just had. So that's another important initiative the president's called for.
Thank you both. I would just very quickly add that in the last month or two, the USDA has come out with its guidance for rural America on opioids. And on our opioids cabinet that meets fairly regularly here at the White House, we have the cabinet departments and agencies you might expect, like HHS and like DOJ, DHS, VA, but we also have USDA represented. We have Department of Labor represented, Housing and Urban Development, because we need to approach this holistically, recognizing that everyone is affected and that for some people, if they're fortunate enough to come through treatment, they may not have skills training opportunities or employment or housing opportunities. And so we're trying to take the long view about fully treating the individual, but I commend you and others to check out the USDA's recommendations and guidance on opioids in rural America. I don't see him, but City Councilman Joe Borelli, there you are, from Staten Island. How are you?
Thank you for having me. So as you could see, and you alluded to earlier, I was one of those people who ate the French fries and the ice cream rather than the drugs.
You're still here, see? Nothing bad happens.
Some people in my family weren't so lucky, and in addition to that, I also chair the council's committee that oversees the fire department and our EMS, and I also teach at a college on Staten Island, so I'm pretty familiar with the problem. And in our county alone, there were 116 opioid deaths, and 44% of them were from fentanyl, which is, leaps and bounds the highest percentage of any drug. And that mimics the national average. About 20,000 people die from fentanyl. So, Director, you started off by saying what we're going to do to combat fentanyl, but it pretty much all comes from China, and it all comes through our borders. So sort of a little bit more specifically, what is the administration going to do going forward? Thank you.
Well, obviously, this president, the attorney general have talked a lot about border security. And hopefully we're all aware of all the things that we need to do on border security. It's been an issue election after election, and that's what this president ran on, and I think why a lot of people voted for him, because they believe that he can actually do something on it. And as I said, I think it will save lives. We have indicted the first 2 Chinese manufacturers and distributors of fentanyl in this administration. I think actions like that will make a difference. And I think that what the president advocated for on Monday can make a difference, which is you have, first of all, very clever manufacturers. Instead of making fentanyl, they'll make what we call an analog to fentanyl, carfentanil, and they all sort of sound the same. Carfentanil, by the way, is an elephant tranquilizer, so don't take that unless you're an elephant. So DEA has put a temporary scheduling mechanism on that so that regardless of what you're calling your analog, we can still treat it like fentanyl and we can prosecute it like fentanyl. But what we need Congress to do is make that permanent so that you can't skirt around the rules. And 2, we can make the punishments a lot stronger. As I said, 3 pounds of fentanyl can kill everyone in Toledo. So we need to make sure that it's treated that way in our laws and in our sentencing laws. We can make the mandatory minimums a lot higher for this. And the drug kingpin statute that's currently on the books allows for the death penalty for drug dealers. The death penalty has never been sought under that, and yesterday the Attorney General sent a memorandum to all U.S. attorneys that said, where appropriate, you should look at seeking the death penalty for these drug dealers.
Well, Fentanyl's not the hardest thing on earth, and synthetic fentanyl is not the hardest thing on earth to make, unfortunately. And so while much comes from China, we are seeing the democratization of the manufacturing of fentanyl, including in Mexico. And so, as Sarah said, we've got to stop it at the border, and that's where DHS and the Justice Department are focused. It'd be a lot better if it stopped at the point of shipping. And so that's where the president has directed that we all in this administration are working with the countries where this is originating to get it to stop from ever getting on a boat and coming over here, because it's a lot easier to do that than to interdict it at mail facilities or a border, especially when we deal with such very small quantities that are so unbelievably potent.
Thank you both. From Glenside, Pennsylvania, Hannah Bogorowski. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, everyone. When I was in high school, we were always taught that marijuana was the big gateway drug. But now I'm seeing more and more young people dying from opioids with their addiction starting in their family's medicine cabinets, whether it be from leftover painkillers, anti-anxiety pills, et cetera. What is this, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but what is this administration doing to convey to the young people that these so-called family medicine cabinet drugs are just as dangerous?
Yeah, we really have to get after that issue, and that's where the multimedia campaign that Kellyanne is working with us on is so important, and just generally educating through doctors and any other venue that we can how dangerous these medicines are. Do not, if you get a 90-count prescription for your wisdom teeth and you use 2 of them, don't keep 98 for a rainy day. Get rid of them, get them out, and take them to an appropriate facility to get rid of them for your own safety, the safety of your kids. So that's the legal opioids. You mentioned marijuana. Well, as Kellyanne, this is something people are not talking enough about, is the lacing of illegal drugs with fentanyl. Okay? These are very sophisticated operators, and they are lacing other illegal drugs with fentanyl to get you hooked on opioids and bring you into their system. I have met the families of individuals who have taken street versions of antidepressants, for instance, so illegal street versions of them, thinking they were taking a medicine for depression, and it was laced with fentanyl, and they are now dead. Okay? Marijuana laced with fentanyl. All kinds of other products laced with fentanyl. The country has not yet woken up to this scourge of fentanyl as the super-powered opioid that it is, and how the enemies of our public health are using it to get you hooked in ways, again, that you are not seeking out to become an opioid addict, but you may find yourself one.
So you actually talked about my mother. I talk about her from time to time. She was a very early Trump supporter, supported him in the primary, and just loves our president so much. She absolutely hoards the pills for rainy days. And, you know, I'm sitting up here on this panel thinking about this, and I'm like, you know what? I think my mother does that, and now I'm going to go home and check. So I'm going to call her after this, because I actually think that, you know, she comes from that generation, right? Like, they keep everything if it could be used someday. And so, like, she will not take any of them. She'll just save them all, like, because you never know when you're going to need that Tylenol with codeine laced through it, whatever. So I'm doing that when I get off this panel.
Glad to hear it.
And just because the bottle is in your house and the label says the family doctor, the local pharmacy, mom or dad seem to feel better when they take it because it was prescribed for them for a specific injury or specific condition for a specific prescribed period of time, does not mean someone else should be using it. That's the other tricky part. This is not a drug addiction, doesn't start in the back alley where you're putting a needle in your vein. It is starting at home in the medicine cabinets, and we hear that time and again. The couple who came up, Mr. and Mr. Moser, who came up in honor of their memory of their son, Adam, that is how it started. They said he found ours in the kitchen, you know, sitting on the counter. Thank you, Hannah. And finally, we have Jason Ross, chairman of the Massachusetts College Republicans. You can tell us how lonely that is and ask a question about opioids.
Thank you. It is very lonely up in Massachusetts, I will tell you. My question is that 83% of all overdose deaths in Massachusetts are from fentanyl. I mean, that is astounding, and it's taking a big toll on our millennial generation and all generations. But unfortunately, some states, such as Massachusetts, don't classify fentanyl as a Class A substance, which means that drug traffickers of fentanyl can't be charged as traffickers. What can the DOJ and the administration do to help change federally the classification of fentanyl to make sure that traffickers are tried as traffickers?
Absolutely. So with DEA's temporary scheduling that just changed, we will be able to treat all these fentanyl analogs as the most serious that we can. But really, and this is the problem with so many of this, like we need Congress to act on this. We need them to see this as the problem that it is. And I do think that that message is getting through thanks to Kellyanne and the President and Secretary Azar and frankly all the work that you guys are doing out there. But you've got to raise this issue and we've got to increase the punishment because as the President said, you know, you look at other countries and they'll tell you that they don't have a drug problem. It's because they don't have the drug traffickers. So we can do more on this.
Kellyanne, do you remember when we were up at in Manchester at the fire hall, and we were talking with Kevin, who was one of the first responders there, and he was telling us about the proportion of fentanyl overdoses and their calls to fires. Do you remember the number?
Yes, it's 3 or 4 to 1 from the fire station there, and that's very typical for the hardest hit states and jurisdictions where fire departments are 3 to 4 times more likely to be called to a drug overdose than a fire. And also when we were at that speech, the President, in his remarks, Jason talked about Lawrence, Massachusetts as a sanctuary city, and the President there is tying in together a number of his different policies. I believe it was an ICE agent he called to the stage who had arrested, or I guess found or had arrested somebody there who was an illegal, but they were also a drug trafficker, I believe is how the story went. But these sanctuary cities, also, people think of them as you're harboring people, but you're also harboring poison in some instances. And we've heard that from a number of governors in neighboring states also across this country too, where they would like us to be aware of the sanctuary cities in neighboring states where then the drugs are just driven over in your car across the border. So thank you for that question. We're now going to move on to free speech. Sarah, we'll start with you. Charlie Kirk sat very close to where you were sitting last hour with the President of the United States and said to the President, of all the things he could say, he said, we're getting reports that it's more and more difficult in the 1,200 college campuses where Turning Point USA is active, more and more difficult for folks to feel like they can speak freely, particularly about their politics. What is the state of so-called free speech on college campuses? Are you finding it's more of an oxymoron? What are we doing to protect it, and what are we doing to communicate to young people on college campuses and who are about to in the next several years what their rights are?
Well, and you guys in the audience know this probably a lot better than we do on stage. I mean, Emily Hall is here, who is at Harvard, and she's the head of the Institute of Politics there. And I mean, Emily and I talk about this all the time. It's so different from when I was in college, and we were all saying, I think we'd all be expelled now if we were in college these days. So how you guys are doing it, I mean, thumbs up. We are seeing incredible cases around the country. So we just filed in Berkeley where they wanted to have a debate on immigration, both sides. And what the school decided was that the one side of the debate wasn't controversial. So that could be on campus in sort of the prime speaking time for these students. But the other side of the debate was controversial. So that had to be off time, off campus, basically where no one could hear it. That was the goal. And so what we've done is filed a statement of interest, it's called in that case. It's basically an amicus brief coming on the side of the plaintiff saying that that is a violation of their First Amendment rights. If you go to a state school, they are part of the government. That is your First Amendment, and they cannot abridge that. Another just incredible, I mean, some of these blow my mind when I read them. This one kid, I can't imagine he thought this would be controversial. He wanted to hand out copies of the U.S. Constitution. It had the First Amendment in it. They stopped him, told him to stop. He said, well, you see the irony in this, I'm not gonna stop. And so he kept handing out copies of the Constitution. They arrested him on his college campus. Like, I couldn't have written that. I mean, as a press person, my first thought is like, you did this for me, thank you. This is the best example ever. You were handing out the First Amendment and they arrested you for it. You know, in another case, on their entire college campus, there is 616 square feet called the free speech zone that you're allowed to have free speech in, only if you have a permit from the school and you tell them what you're going to say ahead of time. So there are insidious ways that they are attacking students. It's these free speech zones. It's this idea of the heckler's veto, really what Berkeley did, which is if someone else might find your speech offensive, they control whether you get to speak. They decide whether what you're doing is offensive and get to say no. Guy Benson speaks at college campuses across the country, and he was telling me they have like emergency exit routes for him. I am sorry, but if you are on a college campus and can't handle having an idea exposed to you that might challenge your worldview, you're doing the wrong thing. You shouldn't be in college. You should be in a little bubble.
Also may have a difficult time throughout life where it just doesn't simply operate that way outside the
I think we
bubble.
saw that after the last election.
That's right. Secretary Azar, did you want to comment on that?
Just that I've got a daughter who's about to start in college next year. I can't even imagine. I am so glad that I'm old.
Well, wait till what happens when, since we're the same age, stop it. But wait till she tries to invite her dad, who's in the president's cabinet, to
oh, heaven
to
help
speak.
her.
We'll see what happens. So, Sarah, you have a question from Tyson Langhofer of Phoenix, Arizona. There he is.
Thanks for talking about this important topic. I'm the director of Alliance Defending Freedom's Center for Academic Freedom.
Great organization. Thank you for the work that you do.
Absolutely. So we defend the First Amendment rights of students and faculty throughout the country, and we see exactly what you see and what you've talked about every day. In fact, I have 3 current and former clients here today. I just want to recognize Mark Cahanding at Cal State LA, stand up for a second, and Jeff Lyons at Bunker Hill Community College, a Navy veteran, and Nathan Apodaca of Cal State San Marcos. You know, it takes courage to stand up to your university. Can we just take a second and you know, thank them for standing? So we've seen this happen in many different ways. We represented 3 students at Kellogg Community College that were handing out the Constitution on a public sidewalk, and they were arrested and taken to jail because they were handing out the First Amendment. We represented them successfully, thankfully. They were Young Americans for Liberty group out there standing for liberty. We represent currently Chike Uzabunam as a student at Georgia Gwinnett College, and the Department of Justice has weighed in on that, and we appreciate that. But Chike was sharing his Christian faith with other students, and he was stopped by his college because they said they had a policy that said that you cannot disturb the peace and or comfort of other people. We represent Nathan Apodaca at Cal State San Marcos, and his Students for Life group was denied funding because the school has a policy which allows them to favor certain groups over other groups with the student activity fees that every student is required to pay. We currently represent a Young Americans for Freedom group at Kennesaw State University. They hosted Katie Pavlich to talk about, of all things, media bias on campus. And the university required them to pay a security fee because in their own determination, they determined that what Katie was going to talk about was controversial. And finally, Mark Cahanding, when Mark's Young Americans for Freedom group invited Ben Shapiro to come to campus, the students and the faculty flooded the student union, blocked both the front and back entrances so students couldn't attend that event. There were 24 security guards on campus at that time, and they didn't do a thing to stop this unlawful behavior. And so my question is, what can the President Trump and his administration, the Department of Justice, do to protect the First Amendment rights of students on campus?
Like so many things, I think this president leads by example on this issue more than anyone else ever has. To say, you know, I'm going to challenge your worldview, I'm going to say what I think, and argue back with me if you don't like it, but you don't get to silence it. And so I think the problem that we have is that on college campuses, so many college students are being silenced, something they can't do to us when we're out of college and adults. I get to say what I want to my friends, and you know, Kellyanne and I get to go on TV and speak our minds. But that's not true on a college campus. They can expel you. They can arrest you. You know, at Middlebury, one of those protests turned violent, and they actually ended up attacking the liberal sort of accidentally, and she had to go to the hospital for a neck injury. And so it's out of hand, and you see this, unfortunately, in polling. It's culturally insidious. 20% of students who were polled said that they believed that you could use violence to shut down speech that you found offensive. And it's why you're seeing speech codes on college campus, that offensive speech is not allowed. Who determines what's offensive? What does offensive mean? And if that becomes a subjective standard, I don't think that that really fits with academic freedom and with actually what allows us to have the startups in Silicon Valley and the creation at the NIH of a new non-opioid painkiller. That is from challenging the status quo and from saying I have a better idea and I have a different way to do it, not from groupthink. So we are happy to wade into these cases where we can, and very happy that groups like you exist to do the work that you do every day and spend your time on. ADF, I know, has taken their slings and arrows as well. So it is about a cultural change, and that's all of you guys can do far more than I can on that.
Thank you, Sarah. Mark, did you want to say anything?
Good afternoon. Thank you guys for being here. So as Tyson mentioned before, I am the chairman of the Young Americans for Freedom chapter at California State University of Los Angeles, which is a chapter affiliate of Young America's Foundation. And being part of a great organization like YAF, it's taught me to stand up and fight for my conservative beliefs. But because of this, I've had professors and administrators constantly threaten me with violence. So my question to everyone on the panel is, what will this administration do for conservative students like me who are trying to speak up on the college campuses?
Can I first ask you what the college campus did for you before we get the federal government answer?
Could you clarify?
Did the college campus help you out at all? Did California State help you out at all?
When I brought over Ben Shapiro, there was a lot of red tape going on. 2 days before, they tried to charge me security fees. And after that, 2 days before the event, the president of the university canceled the event. And because that was a clear violation of our constitutional rights, we worked with Alliance Defending Freedom to present a lawsuit to them. And after that lawsuit, the university is now working with us to give us conservative speakers on campus.
It does seem anyway, Sarah, that when you hear these shock the conscience anecdotes, that if they're brought to the Department of Justice, or I assume in some cases the state courts or the state prosecutors in this case, that action can be taken or at least examined. Is that the way it works? If he were to call the Department of Justice hotline, let's just say, what would happen?
Absolutely. So if it's a state school, you have First Amendment rights there. And if it's a private school, they take federal money, and there are things we can do there on the margins as well. And what they're doing with Alliance Defending Freedom is incredibly important. The problem is that, and we know this in other things that the president has done, the court system takes a long time. You're going to be probably out of college by the time this is resolved. And thank you for standing up and doing that, and the amount of time and energy it's going to take for you to see that through is so important for everyone else in this room. But again, it has to be more than the federal government coming down and working through the court system. It's more than that. It is changing that idea that I think the president does every time he speaks. I think it makes a difference to show, even if it's just you at your school alone, that you can say what you think.
And it would have the terrible chilling effect of really discouraging people in the future from bringing college campus speakers or organizing or having a club or a meeting as such. So my advice would be to not allow that to deter you, to allow that to fortify you, and to channel that into action together, because I think there is a great deal of not just safety but strength in numbers when it comes to that. Kara Zupkis here at George Washington University. Thanks, Kara.
Hi, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today. So I'm Kara. I'm a junior at George Washington University, and I'm treasurer of our Young America's Foundation chapter there. We do face a lot of backlash from students on campus, specifically about free speech. Most recently, we brought Senator Rick Santorum to speak on the Second Amendment. Students vandalized over 2,000 of our posters because they did not agree with them. People were following us, trying to take down the posters as soon as they were up, simply because they thought they were dangerous or didn't agree with speech. In my opinion, free speech shouldn't be a partisan issue. And a lot of the times the administrators don't do as much for conservative students on campus as I feel that they should or that they would with liberal students and liberal student groups on campus. So I guess my question for you would be, how can we hold administrators accountable to ensure that there is no kind of viewpoint discrimination, especially in regards to free speech?
How great that you postered 2,000. I mean, that's a lot. Like, all of us have postered before. Like, I'm impressed. Make them take down 2,000 posters if that's what they're going to spend their time on. Well done, you. I can only imagine what you did with the chalking. That was like on my campus. That took lots of time. So, again, you're at a private school. If you were at a public school, obviously your representatives would have something to do with that and who these administrators are. The Department of Education, though, at these private schools provides a lot of federal dollars to these schools. But your bravery will do a lot on this. And so keep postering with 3,000 posters next time as well. And stand up to administrators, make what they're doing public. But, you know, everyone here, and I think everyone on this panel would say this as well. The courage and bravery that you're having to display now will pay dividends for you later. So don't back down and don't get shy now. You're in the heat of the battle. So fight on and you will reap the rewards.
It really is very important to stick with it. Secretary Azar, I didn't tell you we were going to talk about this, but you're ready. So you got that from the president on Monday, right? So this is nothing. Can you tell us a little bit about the Code-a-thon that happened at HHS? Because I think it's a very impressive exercise, and perhaps in the future, some people in this audience are watching would want to be involved in that.
So we had an exercise where we brought in top flight coders and others to help us as we deal with these problems. It was before I got there. They all came in and really spent, was it a day or a whole day, as a Code-a-thon, doing a contest on this work of ways that they could develop the best apps and help us with our data and manipulating our data to try to find trends out there that would help us from an enforcement perspective or a regulatory perspective. I don't know if you've got some other context from your work with it.
I think it's great, and I wanted you to mention it on behalf of HHS because I think it's a great example of where best practices in the private sector are coming into the cabinet department that is tasked with the health side of this crisis. We have met with the tech companies here at the White House. We've met with the professional sports leagues. Folks have been incredibly helpful in asking how can we help. And I will just tell you in closing, each of you can offer closing remarks as well, but in closing I will tell you that this, as even the President and the First Lady have remarked, is a nonpartisan issue looking for bipartisan solutions. And we have been very heartened to see some pieces of legislation pass with overwhelming support, in some cases near unanimity in its support. And I just think when you talk about something like coding, we don't necessarily think of federal agencies hosting those types of events or contests. It gets the public involved in a way too that'll help cure what I consider to be the information underload on so many of these issues. We're inundated with information on so many things, but I bet you heard some of these anecdotes on free speech for the first time today. You've probably heard some information from the Secretary and from Ms. Flores on opioid-related issues and ideas and circumstances. So to the extent that my advice to you would be a resource. Tell someone else. I think peer-to-peer is the way to go. People will look at you and say, I like you and you're like me. And it's much more important to have peer-to-peer messengers on the campuses and within the larger communities than nearly anything else. Secretary Azar, would you like to say anything in closing?
We've got a great group of folks here and online watching, and I would just encourage you all to think about coming into government, those who are in school, think about that in the future, and those who are already out, think about the impact that you can have by joining us in government on this type of work, whether it's at the state or the federal level. At a young age, you can have a tremendous, tremendous impact, and it can be extremely fulfilling. The kinds of issues Sarah and I have been talking about here, you can play a big role on. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Sarah?
Well, I would just say I also went to school in Massachusetts and know how lonely that can be out there. And I'm so glad all of y'all are together here. When you go back to your schools and you're feeling lonely, remember being in this room and that everyone here was with you and supported you, and that you know, you do have folks out there. So keep up the courage, fight the good fight, because I think that the college campus is so important to setting some of these trends that will affect the rest of the country. So come join.
It's a great way to end. Thank you all very much, and God bless you.